which is the resurrection of Jesus, never happened. I mean...
Well, that's an assertion, Peter. What about some evidence?
Well, what about some evidence that it did happen, other than people who are writing Gospels of 80 years later than the event that they purport to be talking about? No, of course it didn't happen. How could it happen? And science, I think, could even go so far as saying it simply could not happen. When you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute in some way. It's absurd. And I accept that it is the foundation of Christian faith. That doesn't mean to say that it's true.
And it seems appropriate to begin by asking you both the question, can science explain everything? Perhaps we could start with you, Peter.
Yeah, well, I'm not a politician, so I'll give you a straight answer. The answer is yes. Of course, it hasn't yet explained everything, but there are no signs that it's going to run up against a brick wall and stop explaining everything. And I think we should, first of all, be clear what we mean by science. And science is basically a method of discovery based on observation. And taking evidence that can be shared publicly and generally. And that is really the core of the scientific method. But it's not the only component of the scientific method that's important, because the ideas that science generates sit in a network of ideas. So ideas might emerge from biology, they might emerge from physics, chemistry, whatever, psychology, and where they overlap, they are mutually supportive. And this is extraordinarily strong evidence for the appropriateness of science as a means of discovering the truth about the fabric of reality, and indeed all there is. The second part of these introductory comments that I'd like to make is that we have to think about what we mean by the questions that science approaches. And I think there are two classes of question. One is stupid questions, and the other is real questions. And a lot of the stupid questions, maybe that's too strong a term, a lot of class one, let me call it, questions have emerged as extrapolations of human angst, worries about the nature of the world, projections of human ideas where they where they are not supported by any evidence. Science deals with real questions. Science deals with questions for which there is evidence. So, whereas a typical religious question might be, what is the purpose of the universe? Science can dismiss that as an irrelevant question. There is no evidence that there is any purpose in the universe. In fact, I think it rather wonderful that this extraordinary collection of galaxies is just hanging there, totally without any purpose whatsoever. I think that's rather grand, frankly, and rather inspiring. So when you ask questions for which there is no evidence, such as that one, what is the purpose of the universe, what is the nature of the afterlife, and all that sort of thing, science need not trouble to try to answer them because they're nonsense questions. Science deals with real questions, questions for which there is evidence. And some of these are very deep, and let's not hide them under a bushel. I think one major question is, why is there something rather than nothing? It certainly seems as though there is something, and we presume that before there was something, there was nothing. So it seems to be a real question, and science has as its objective an attempt to answer that kind of question. Another deep question, of course, is the nature of consciousness and all the attributes of consciousness. We appear to have consciousness. There is evidence that we do. And so it is appropriate for science to tackle that. And by consciousness, I mean all the attributes of consciousness, including morality. And so those are real questions. Those are the questions that science can answer. And there is no doubt in my mind that over the past, let's say 300 years, that science has done its job seriously. That is, collecting evidence, setting it in a network of concepts, and seeing the way that they are mutually supportive. I think there's no doubt that over 300 years we have made extraordinary progress, and there is no reason other than pessimism to expect that science will grind to a halt and not answer all the real great questions of existence.
Thank you very much.
Peter Atkins argues that science is the best way to understand reality, and he's right. Just look at the evidence. For centuries, religion claimed diseases were caused by sin or demons. Science replaced that with germ theory and saved millions of lives. The same goes for natural disasters. Christianity once said earthquakes were God's punishment. Science showed us they're caused by tectonic shifts, predictable, measurable, and completely natural. When Atkins says science answers real questions, he's referring to questions with evidence. That's how we know atoms exist, how evolution works, and how we can build a spacecraft to land on a comet. Religion offers stories. Science offers proof. Even big philosophical questions like why there is something rather than nothing are being explored through physics. Theories like quantum fluctuations and vacuum energy suggest that something can arise spontaneously without a divine creator. Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, explains this in detail, backed by cosmological models and quantum mechanics, not scripture.
Very much. So an emphatic yes to the idea that in principle science can explain everything that's worth explaining in that sense. So John, same question to you. Can science explain everything?
Well, obviously not. Brexit, for example. That's a comical response, but I have actually two more answers to the question. You're going to be surprised at how much I agree with Peter, because the definition of science he offered us, that is collecting evidence, making observations, in fact in his book on being, he reduces it beautifully to making observations and comparing notes. If that's what we mean by science, and it's the old meaning of science before the 19th century, then of course science can explain everything, because the very word explanation means making evidence-based observations and notes. So my short answer is, if we accept Peter's first definition, then I agree with him entirely. Science, by definition, explains everything. But of course, the meaning of the word science has changed in England, but not on the continent. In German, Wissenschaft covers the humanities and the natural sciences. And when people these days say science can explain everything, they're not referring simply to making observations and comparing notes at all. For instance, that would apply to any historical or forensic examination. And my faith as a Christian is based precisely on the kind of scientific reasoning that Peter has set forward to us. The main issue, I think, in discussion today is not whether that kind of evidence-based thinking and observation can come to every conclusion. Let me just say, by the way, that from the Christian perspective, Luke, the writer of the third gospel, tells us that that is exactly what his method was. He consulted people, he made observations, and then he put them together. So we'll call that science one. What is, of course, at stake today is the question, can the natural sciences answer every question? And there I think that that is simply not the case. The Nobel Prize winner Peter Medawar, many years ago, he wrote a very interesting book on the limits of science. And he said, we do science a disservice, natural science, if we think it can address any questions. And every question. And he referred to the basic questions of Karl Popper, the questions of a child. Where do I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? Natural science doesn't answer questions like that. And Medawar added it is to religion, philosophy, and so on that we must go to answer those questions. I think science is immensely powerful. It is immensely exciting. And it uncovers a vast amount about our universe. But I have a problem by going too far. I'm a mathematician, and I'm rather interested in logic. And you know, if we say that science can explain everything, or science is the only way to truth, as it's often put, well, that is not a statement of science. It's a statement of belief. And so if it's true, it's false. Maybe it's too early in the evening for logic like that, but there's a huge logical problem. So to sum up my position, science is powerful. Its methodologies are extremely important also in the sphere of history, forensic science, and in the sphere of religion. But I'm going to be careful here, because Peter is right very often in his critique of superstition, of mythology, and nonsense. And science has helped to clear away some of the nonsensical things that sometimes religious people profess. But what really makes me, in one sense, very much in favor of the Christian faith is that from the very start it claims to be evidence-based. And the central piece of evidence is, of course, as you probably know, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I believe in Peter's methodology. I use it all the time, but somehow he feels that a Christian like me doesn't use that methodology within my own Christian faith. Final point, I think explanation, can science explain everything? We need to tease out what we mean by the word explanation. For example, the law of gravity doesn't explain gravity. It tells, as Newton realized, it tells us wonderful mathematics that we can calculate the way in which heavy bodies move in relationship to one another. But even when we say science explains, often it doesn't explain comprehensively. And I just want to throw a very simple analogy into this, which I find quite useful. About boiling water. How would you explain boiling water? Well, you can explain it by talking about heat conduction and agitation of molecules of water. You can also say the water is boiling because I'd like a cup of tea. Now, those two explanations are very different. They don't conflict. They complement. One is a scientific explanation, natural scientific, but the other is an explanation in terms of the intention and purposes of an agent. And Peter said quite clearly that science doesn't go in for that kind of purpose, but that doesn't mean that kind of purpose doesn't exist. In fact, people have been enjoying tea for millennia before they knew anything about the theory of heat in physics. So what I want to say is this. The God explanation is different from the science explanation. God no more competes with science as an explanation of the universe than Henry Ford competes with physics as an explanation of the motor car.
Lennox tries to argue that science can't explain everything by redefining what explanation means. He gives examples like the meaning of life, or why the water's boiling, and claims that because science doesn't address personal intention or purpose, it's incomplete. But this is a category mistake. Science isn't about human preferences, it's about objective reality. Saying, I want tea, explains your personal motive, not the physical process of boiling water. That's not a failure of science, that's just two different levels of description. One is emotional, one is factual. Lennox also appeals to Peter Medawur's view that science can't answer questions like, why are we here? But those are philosophical, not scientific, because they don't have observable evidence behind them. Asking, why am I here, assumes a purpose that hasn't been demonstrated. Science doesn't answer questions loaded with assumptions. It investigates what is, not what people wish to be true. And as for his claim that Christianity is evidence-based because Luke said he interviewed people, that's not evidence. That's hearsay from a gospel written decades after the events it describes, in a time where oral storytelling was the norm. No physical records, no eyewitnesses that can be verified, no corroboration outside the Christian texts. If someone today wrote a biography of a miracle worker based only on interviews and word of mouth, we wouldn't call that evidence. We'd call it mythology. Then there's the resurrection. Lennox says it's the central piece of evidence. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we don't have it. We have no physical body, no confirmed eyewitness accounts, no contemporary Roman records mentioning a crucifixion that disrupted history. In contrast, scientific discoveries like evolution, gravity, and DNA are supported by physical evidence that can be tested by anyone, anywhere. Even the idea that science is just a belief falls apart. Belief without evidence is faith. Belief built on observation, repeatable testing, and falsifiability. That's science. Saying science can't explain everything is just another way of saying, I want to keep certain answers off limits.
Hey, thank you. Great introductory statements from both of you. I'm sure there's lots you want to respond to there. Peter, where do you want to begin?
Well, there's so much nonsense to hack away from.
This may be the phrase of the evening, yes.
Yeah. Let's go to what you called the core of your approach, which is the resurrection of Jesus. Never happened. I mean...
Well, that's an assertion, Peter. What about some evidence?
Well, what about some evidence that it did happen, other than people who are writing Gospels of 80 years later than the event that they purport to be talking about? No, of course it didn't happen. How could it happen? And science, I think, could even go so far as saying it simply could not happen. When you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute in some way. It's absurd. And I accept that it is the foundation of Christian faith. That doesn't mean to say that it's true. And so let's dismiss that as something that simply has no evidence whatsoever of any credible
Before we
nature.
dismiss it, let's hear a response from John, because obviously this is an important issue. What counts as evidence and what are the assumptions
and indeed,
we make?
I suppose you would argue that science cannot explain the resurrection.
Well,
I wouldn't quite argue that way. I would say that science cannot forbid a resurrection, because you see, science proceeds on discovering the regularities to which nature works and has done a very impressive job. And the fact that we know that dead bodies don't normally rise, that is a law of nature in that sense, means that we recognize something very special happened, if it did happen. Now, there are two issues here. The first of all, there's the in-principle one, which always ends up in talking about David Hume, who said that miracles are violations of the laws of nature. And I do not believe they are. That's point number one, and I can go into that if you like. Do you want me to?
Do you want to believe? Well, we might as well, since you raised it.
Well, you better define a miracle. I think a miracle is defined as something that is against the laws of nature.
But I don't define it like that at all. A miracle, miraculum in Latin simply means something to be wondered at, but we're talking about something supernatural. Now, it seems to me very clear that when Hume said miracles violate the laws of nature, he was really not understanding. And the great interpreter, Anthony Flew, of David Hume.
No.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think he was going to object to the raising of Anthony Flew.
Oh, well, I'll not raise Anthony
Let's
Flew.
get back to raising
He
Jesus,
has died and hasn't risen. I do, I do see that point. But the point is this. C.S. Lewis long ago told a little analogy. If I stay in a hotel tonight, put £100 in a drawer, and do the same tomorrow night, there are £200 in it. 1 + 1 = 2. If on the third morning I find 50 quid, what do I say? That the laws of arithmetic have been broken, or the laws of England? Clearly, I say the laws of England have been broken. How do I know? Because the laws of arithmetic have not been broken. It's our recognizing of what normally happens that helps us to see an exception. Now, if I were claiming that the body of Jesus rose from the dead by processes, natural processes going on in the grave 5 minutes before we happened, yes, that would be wrong. But I'm not claiming that. What Christians claim is that the God that created the universe and built the regularities
Pure
into
speculation.
it is capable.
Pure speculation.
Well,
Wait a
let's
minute.
allow
No, this
John to
is
finish
worth
his
listening
point.
to.
this isn't speculation. Well,
Let's listen and then you respond, Peter.
Peter, it's dead easy to say it's not worth listening to. You tempt me to say that about some of the things you say, but I'm not going to do that, because it seems to me it's very important to listen to what Christianity claims before you judge it. And what is claimed is the God who creates the universe and sustains it is not subject to laws as if they were laws of a land. He set up the regularities and he can feed a new event into them. And the claim is, and with this I finish, that God raised Christ from the dead by an input of colossal power.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, you've got it, Peter, in one.
No, I mean, this
Well,
is...
that is the claim at the end of the day.
But, I mean, this is... everyone knows here that's nonsense. What you're inventing is an agent who can do anything he likes. He or she likes, I suppose you have to say these days. And so it is the laziest way of accounting for observations, sometimes observations that were never actually made. Religious explanations which resort to God did it are intellectually lazy. I won't use a stronger term than that, but I do think that they are lazy, because, I mean, what does it mean as an explanation? You lie there saying, oh, God did it, and everyone says, oh, I understand now. Religious explanations are easy to accept by the unthinking. Science is difficult to accept because it involves a lot of thought. You really have to tease out the processes by which an event occurs. You can't simply say, and God did it. You've got to go through, in biology, you delve down into, if you like, the chemistry of the organism. In chemistry, you delve down into the physics of the underlying processes. And I accept, maybe in physics, you have to delve down into the underlying mathematical fabric of whatever I mean by that. It's jolly hard work, and you've got to work on it. But it's more satisfying when you get to the end of an explanation than that extraordinarily lazy way of pretending to explain by saying, and abracadabra, God did it. I mean, that is intellectually corrupt.
Let's be clear. Peter Atkins is right to call the resurrection story absurd. Not to be cruel, but because it defies everything we know about biology, medicine, and physics. Once a body dies, decomposition begins within minutes. Cells break down. Organs fail. Brain function is permanently lost. There is zero empirical evidence, none, that a dead human being has ever come back to life after days in a tomb. Lennox tries to dance around this with philosophical wordplay. God isn't breaking the laws of nature, he's just feeding in new events. But that's not an explanation. That's just invoking magic and calling it divine. It's not based on data, observation, or repeatability. It's the same reasoning used for thousands of unverified religious claims throughout history, from Osiris to Krishna to Muhammad's night journey. Belief doesn't make something true. He compares God to a thief overwriting arithmetic in a hotel drawer. But that only proves the point. If the drawer has less money than expected, We assume theft because we have evidence that theft happens. We don't assume magic. That's exactly how science works, by seeking the most plausible, evidence-based explanation. And Lennox's ultimate fallback? That God, who made the rules, can break them. But that's the problem. If you allow supernatural exceptions anytime you hit a difficult question, you're no longer doing reasoning. You're escaping it. It's a shortcut that ends the conversation and replaces inquiry with obedience. Atkins is right. Religious explanations aren't just unhelpful. They're lazy. They shut down investigation. Science, on the other hand, demands proof. It works hard for its answers. And it's brought us everything from antibiotics to spaceflight to the internet you're watching this video on. If belief in miracles had any real explanatory power, it would have produced results by now. It hasn't. So here's the question for you. Do you want answers based on hope or on evidence? If you're tired of "God did it" being used to explain the unknown, hit like, drop a comment below, and subscribe for more thoughtful breakdowns like this. Let's keep asking questions and insisting on real answers.
The incremental effort of a lot of steady work that some of us have been putting in to dispel illusions in the supernatural, and in a private belief that I've held for a long time, which is that very many of the practitioners of these faiths don't believe it either. And perhaps that might be the first consolation that we take away from this evening's discussion. My own task having been so much lightened, even though I retain the tiny suspicion, and I hope it's an ignoble one, that Rabbi Shmuley might possibly be going easy on me. And that would be a great cause of resentment. If I thought for a second that that was true, it's already bad enough that I'm the fifth person appearing on this stage, and you may have noticed the steady decline in the standard of pulchritude that went on after number 3 had left the stage. So I'm left to restate what I still want to say, and have to begin with a disagreement. The idea that a person who martyrs himself and kills others in the cause of the faith will be rewarded in paradise is not a delusion of Muhammad Atta's. I wish it was. It would be very nice if we could say that that was the case. It is rather a belief firmly rooted in the holy book of the Muslim faith, the Quran. It is believed by an enormous number of people. It may not be disbelieved that someone who martyrs himself for the faith will be so rewarded. To do that would be to challenge the authenticity of the book, and therefore cannot be done. The most that can be done is to say that somebody interpreted this mad instruction incorrectly, but we would be living in a very happy world indeed if this was just a delusion of one leader of a 19-man gang. The same, I think, can be said of, I think it's, you'll correct me, I'm sure, Shmuley, if I'm mistaken, but I think it's number 13 of the Rambam's list of articles of faith, Maimonides' opinions of what it's necessary to believe in order to be of the faithful, that there will be a resurrection. It comes just after, I think, the belief that the Messiah will come. Though, because it's Maimonides, because it's the Rambam, he does say, though he may tarry, you may not doubt that he will come, nor may you doubt that you're due another life. Now, I'm sorry. I take this stuff very seriously because I have to deal with, as I do with the Christian version of it, put so creepily and so shadily, that we bury our dead, the Christian faith, of which I'm not a member, they bury their dead in what they call, in this slightly evasive way, the sure and certain hope of resurrection. Not the sureness and the certainty of, you notice. They haven't got the arrogance for that anymore, but the sure and certain hope of resurrection. These are the beliefs on which monotheism has based itself and upon which it continues to exert its extraordinary and lethal power. And I won't take your offer, Rabbi. I can't take it. I can't say all they're talking about is posthumous fame. All they're talking about is reputation. After all, people still read Shakespeare. Surely that proves that there's an afterlife. No, I'm sorry. It's a confusion of categories. It's not comparing like with like. It's not even non-overlapping magisteria. It's radically discrepant views of what reality is. And if religion would say, we don't promise you anything after death, that would be the end of it. And Shmuley would be talking ethical Judaism, and I would be saying, atheism is compatible with any belief you like. You can be an atheist and be a supporter of Ayn Rand, the most famous atheist in America. You can be an atheist and a nihilist. You can be an atheist and a fascist. All you have to do is say that you reject the supernatural dimension. But that's the most crucial thing. And now the critique of religion that we've evolved over the years in Mortal Kombat with it is this, essentially. First, that it has a very queasy relationship with anything called evidence. That it makes very, very large claims for itself. Perhaps Rabbi Shmuley won't choose this evening to do so, but it claims to talk in terms of redemption, of salvation, and even of eternity. And there's an inverse relationship between what it claims and the amount of evidence that it can muster. And that this is its original, if you like, sin. Second, that it seems to deal in absolutes, that it appears to want us to think of a God who is in some way or another a dictator in this world, and if this one should prove disappointing, I think you used the word dress rehearsal, the term dress rehearsal, a mere ante-room. If you think this is unfair, if you think this is discrepant, if you think this is irrational, why do the evil prosper? Why do the good get trampled underfoot and left behind? Never mind. Once you've squeezed with agony through the keyhole of death, there's another whole world where all that will be put right, where every tear will be dried and every injustice compensated, which, if it was true, would be a terrible exercise in sadomasochism. And why put a bunch of rats into a labyrinth of torture? See how they do, surprise them with new rules, even bigger surprise when you squeeze them through that last gap. Now we have you, and now you're due for a verdict against which there is no appeal. If you don't believe in that as a scheme, you don't believe in God, you don't believe in the biblical promise of redemption and salvation, and you certainly don't believe in the resurrection. So I think Shmuley's word on that is that that's the case, is as good as anyone else's, and I would say perhaps better than some. But I'm talking also to people who will be tuning into this broadcast later, and I have a captive audience, and so I've got a couple more points to make before I rest the case that you smoothed for me.
Religions promise resurrection and eternal life, but there's no evidence to support it. Science has been studying death for centuries, and every reliable study shows the same thing. When the brain dies, consciousness ends. Neuroscience confirms memory, identity, and awareness are tied to brain function. Once oxygen and blood flow stop, those processes shut down permanently. There has never been a documented reversal. Historically, claims of resurrection are rooted in tradition, not fact. Even the Bible is full of contradictions about it. Matthew 27:52-53 says saints rose from their graves when Jesus died, yet no other gospel or historian of that time mentions this extraordinary event. That silence is strong evidence it didn't happen. The Christian doctrine of the resurrection itself comes from Paul's letters, written decades after Jesus' death, not from eyewitness records. Hitchens is right. The larger the promise, the less evidence there is. And when Christians bury their dead in the sure and certain hope of resurrection, Book of Common Prayer, notice even the wording admits it's only hope, not certainty. Contrast that with what we know from science. Death is final. Religion offers eternal rewards, but it can't prove them.
That it's based on, another element in our critique of it, is that it's based on wishful as well as delusional thinking. Above all, wishful thinking. What is a stronger desire in the human species than that we shall conquer death? We are the only primates, as far as we know, we're the only members even of our own species, the primate species, who are fully aware of death and absolutely unreconciled to the idea of our own extinction. Even though we know our chemical composition, we know we are made out of the same elements as the rest of the cosmos. In fact, rather miraculously, if you want to call it that, we're even made out of stardust. Stars had to die for us to live. So we think it's overwhelmingly probable that when we die, our chemical ingredients will return to the natural biological and biochemical cycle, and there seems no evidence to the contrary. There may be animals who know how to fear death, but certainly no animals who know how to deny it. That's why it's so interesting that among the most frequently asked questions of people to their priests and mullahs and rabbis about the afterlife is, will my dog or cat be there too? And you notice they only ask that, will Timmy be in heaven or Rover? They never say, will that hellish tabby I once had be reassembled in the infernal regions? This is enough to show how wishful the thinking is. Now, I see that Shmuley has Dinesh's clever but, I think, thin book on the case for the afterlife in front of him. And in one debate that I had with Dinesh, he briefly gave me pause by saying, yes, wishful thinking for heaven, all right. That's hedonistic, that's a hope, that's a desire. But then why would people who were wish thinking, why would they want hell? Good point, and it tells against simple-minded Freudianism, as does a lot of other evidence. But not all of our wishes are completely transparent to us, I think, and not all of them are hedonistic, especially as they respect or regard other people. I was one of the 2 or 3 white people in the audience at Madison Square Garden in 1985 when Louis Farrakhan gave his famous address to a packed house of the Nation of Islam and addressed the Jews of the greater New York area in a taunting manner and reminded them, and I'll never forget it, he said, and remember, Jews, when God puts you in the ovens, it's forever. And I shall not soon forget the great moan and groan of pleasure that came from that audience at hearing that. And I should have been prepared for it, not just by the stupidity and nastiness and criminality on which this religious nutbag makes his living in this country. Call someone an imam or a priest or a reverend, there's nothing they can't get away with in our culture. If I could change one thing, it would be that. The second would be when someone gets up and says, I'm a person of faith, that they don't get respect for it. They think that's a respect-producing statement. I am a person of faith. You know, I'm a person who will believe practically anything on no evidence at all. Well, you said it, mister. Respect comes later. I digress. I shouldn't have been surprised by this orgy of sadism and cruelty and gloating from Farrakhan's religious audience, because I've read the Christian fathers. I've read Tertullian, who, answering some questions, one of the great fathers of the church, we see why hell is unpleasant. Why is heaven such fun? It seems to be rather dutiful. Endless praise, endless worship, endless subjection, endless tedium. You think that the Lord himself, after the first 5 billion years, would have had enough of the songs of praise. No, it's got to go on forever. Okay, where's the good bits? Tertullian says that we've thought of the good bits. In the intervals of that, you can go to the edge and you can go and look down and gloat on the torments and endless tortures of the damned. We've thought of that. Now, excuse me, that is a founding statement of Christianity. You can't disown it now. These churches wouldn't be here oppressing us. These mosques wouldn't be here incubating madmen and suicide bombers. There wouldn't be mad Jewish settlers on the West Bank thinking if we could only steal other people's land and bring on the Messiah and Armageddon, everything would be all right. There wouldn't be anything of this if it was left to the rabbi, and myself, but it's not. And Joseph Ratzinger, His Holiness the Pope, has just got off the plane in England today to announce that atheists are Nazis. An overdressed little ponce who was himself a member of the Hitler Youth dares to speak this way. He leaves the palace that quite rightly, Shmuley points out, was built on the sale of indulgences. Well, picture the church as if it had not done that. Are you talking about the same formidable multinational force? No, you're not. Have they disowned what they did? No, they haven't. Are there not still chantries all around the world where prayers are paid for and said for the souls of the dead so that there may be remission from sin, measured, by the way, in years and decades? Or, if you've paid a lot of money to a chantry, maybe centuries of remission from sin, as if the Gregorian calendar is used for matters of eternity and infinity. The pathos, the obviousness of this fraud still goes on, and Ratzinger himself is reinstituting the idea that by making donations to the church and regular appearances at its festivals, there may be an element of remission too. And only now is it being discussed that St. Augustine's vile idea that the souls of unbaptized children may not go to hell but go to an indefinite misery of limbo until the second coming may possibly not have been the way, quite the tone of voice in which to speak to parents who'd lost their child. I'm not neutral about this. I don't think those statements are what they clearly are, man-made, silly, pathetic, mediocre, and erroneous. That is a job within the compass of anyone in this room or beyond. No, I go further. It's an evil doctrine. It's a wicked doctrine. It proceeds from people who want, quite wisely and quite shrewdly, real power over real human beings of a really absolutist sort in the only world we've got, which is the here and now. How smart they are to do it, how overdue we are to tell them that we reject this totalitarian interpretation of human life. Well, I'm not going to say why I don't think near-death experiences are impressive now. So you've spared me that, thank you. Though I wish someone would ask about them. And I think, excuse me, I think I've probably trespassed anyway on the allotted period of my time. But what I say is, thanks for coming, and bring it on, and don't make me suspect that you're sparing me. Thank you.
Hitchens is right that belief in an afterlife is built on wishful thinking. Humans are the only species fully aware of their mortality, and psychology shows we create comforting myths to deny it. Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, explains how cultures invent immortality stories to cope with fear. Neuroscience shows consciousness is a product of the brain, and when brain activity ends, awareness ends. There's no evidence of anything beyond. Even Christianity's picture of heaven and hell reflects human desires and fears, not reality. Early church fathers like Tertullian openly wrote that part of heaven's joy is watching the damned suffer in hell. That isn't love, it's sadism turned into doctrine. The Bible itself reinforces fear. In Matthew 25:46, Jesus says the wicked will face eternal punishment, while the righteous gain eternal life. But there's no evidence for either claim. Historically, the church monetized this fear with indulgences, literally selling forgiveness measured in years out of purgatory. That practice built St. Peter's Basilica. It's not divine truth, it's a financial racket. And science shows the opposite. When we die, our atoms return to nature. We are stardust, recycled into the universe.
All believe in it. The Talmud says that the patriarch Jacob did not die, because the Bible says he didn't die. It says Vayigva, he was elevated. So the Talmud says, Yaakov Avinu lo mes, our patriarch Jacob never died. And then it says, what do you mean he didn't die? It says he was buried. It says that Pharaoh led a giant procession with Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, with so many kings who put their crowns on his coffin. He died. And the Talmud says no. Mazaro b'chaim, afu b'chaim. Because his children live in the example that he displayed. He has an afterlife through them. I see that with Christopher. I see it with Martin Luther King. I'm a white Jew. But his afterlife impacts me almost every day of my life, because he was the greatest American of the 20th century, because he restored us to the founding principles of this nation. And every time we want to move away from it, every time someone says something stupid and racist, stupid and too ethnic, stupid and prejudicial, we remember that he had a dream. And that dream wasn't just while he was a collection of swirling electrons and molecules. That dream transcended him, and it lives on in his afterlife. And it impacts upon us until this very day. I am not interested in heaven, and I couldn't give a damn about hell. If I'm destined to burn, then so be it. I don't want to be in some perfect place where I have nothing to contribute. In my religion and Judaism, when I go to a cemetery to pray at the graves of great people who represented a great idea so that I'm inspired by their vision, by their dream, by their message, I am obligated to tuck in my tzitzit. I'm obligated to not perform any of the Torah's commandments in their presence. The reason? Because we're not jealous of them in heaven. They're jealous of us on earth. They want to do more good deeds. They want to practice more virtue. A perfect abode in heaven is one of the worst religious ideas, even as I affirm a full belief in it. Not that I can prove it. I can't. I cannot. It's a sheer matter of faith. I reject all the silly arguments that are often offered in the name of religion. Near-death experiences, bright lights hovering above your hospital bed. I even saw this cartoon that said, it showed these surgeons who were operating on someone, and on top there was a giant sign that said, "If you can read this, you are dead." I reject near-death experiences. I don't believe they are scientifically acceptable. There's plenty of ways to explain it. Ouija boards, people who speak to the dead are all frauds to a man. I debated them on Larry King, all the people who speak to those in the afterlife, Sylvia Brown and John Edward and James Van Prague. We were on Larry King, and I said, "Larry, this is my yarmulke, and if one of these guys can get up right now and tell us when the next IED will explode in Iraq and Afghanistan, thereby saving the life of a brave American hero, because they can communicate with the dead, they see the future, I will put salt and pepper on this yarmulke and I will eat it right here on national TV."
Shmuley admits it outright. I affirm a full belief in the afterlife. Not that I can prove it. I can't. It's a sheer matter of faith. And that's the problem. No evidence, no data, just belief. Hitchens was right. The afterlife is built on wishful thinking. It's a projection of our fear of death and our desire to live forever. Psychology confirms this in terror management theory. Humans create stories about heaven, souls, and transcendence to reduce existential anxiety. Shmuley tries to dress it up by saying Judaism's afterlife is about legacy. Jacob lives on through his children. Martin Luther King lives on through his dream. But that's not supernatural survival. That's just memory, history, and culture. Neuroscience tells us consciousness dies with the brain. Martin Luther King's speeches endure because people preserve them, not because his soul floats in another realm. And when Shmuley points to Hitler, suggesting there must be an afterlife or justice isn't real, he misses the point. Creating a cosmic torture chamber doesn't solve evil. It's just vengeance projected into eternity. Justice is a human responsibility. Courts, law, accountability here and now. Adding a mythical afterlife doesn't punish Hitler. It just consoles the living. Even his dismissal of near-death experiences shows the inconsistency. He's right, they're not evidence. But that undercuts his entire case. If faith alone is the standard, then any delusion qualifies, including the very extremist distortions he condemns. You can't reject false afterlives without evidence and then claim your own version without evidence. In the end, Hitchens' critique stands. Religions exploit humanity's fear of death, sell false promises like indulgences, and hold power over people with doctrines of heaven and hell. The truth is simpler and far more beautiful. We are stardust, and when we die, our atoms return to the universe. Our legacy lives only in what we build, the love we give, and the knowledge we pass on. That's real, verifiable, and doesn't need wishful thinking. Outro. So what do you think? Is the afterlife nothing more than a human invention to soothe our fear of death? Or do you think Shmuley is right, that there's something beyond, even if it can't be proven? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown of Hitchens versus Shmuley, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dives, and share it with someone who loves big debates.
The whole point of Darwinian natural selection is that it works without design, without foresight,
But that's
without
an
guidance.
assumption.
No, it's not an assumption. That is exactly how it works. Before Darwin came along, it looked perfectly obvious that even if evolution happened, there must be some guiding force to tell animals or plants how they ought to evolve. Natural selection is a blind force. The things that survive, survive. With hindsight, we can see that the ones that survive are the ones that are good at surviving. They have the genes that make them survive. Simon Conway Morris would not deny that. He's got some kind of, well, actually, I rather share his view of convergent evolution. We both of us are perhaps on the extreme end of Darwinians in that we emphasize the power of natural selection to home in on particular ends. Particularly, if you look around the museum, you'll see animals, marsupial animals from Australia that uncannily resemble non-marsupial animals, and Simon and I are both extremely keen on that. But that's produced by natural selection, as he would say. Natural selection is a mechanical, blind, automatic force. It's not, I can't say it's not guided, but there's no need for it to be guided. The whole point is that it works without guidance.
But it could be guided. Or do you completely shut that out?
I mean, why bother when you've got a perfectly good explanation that doesn't involve guidance?
I mean, the point is, you use words like
something?
you use words like blind and automatic. This watch is blind and automatic, but it's been designed. The words themselves do not shut out that notion, and it seems to me that the impression I'm getting is that what's coming through is that the whole process is so sophisticated, it itself is giving evidence of a rational mind behind it. But am I understanding you right, that you say you deny that because you've an in-principle reason for denying it? That is, everything must, as far as you're concerned, go from the simple to the complex. And therefore, your major argument in the God delusion, if I understand it right, is that God is, by definition, more complex than the thing you're explaining, so he's got to be explained. Is that right?
That is a major point that I want to make. But let me go back to what you were saying before about guidance. When you drop a stone, it falls to the ground, and you as a scientist will explain that by gravity. You wouldn't dream of saying, oh, there must be a God pushing it down. That's exactly what you're in effect saying with respect to evolution. Because we understand evolution in just the same kind of level as rather better level than we understand gravity.
No, and this is a very important point, because I detected in many of your writings that you oppose God and science as explanations. When Newton discovered the law of gravity, he didn't say, marvelous, now I can know how it works, I don't need God. God is an explicator at the level of an agent, not a mechanism. So that we can study mechanisms in biology, the more sophisticated they are, the more that might well point towards an agent. You don't argue away the existence of an agent by showing that there is a mechanism. And I don't quite understand how you manage to get, if I understand you right, God and science as alternative explanations.
Well, I think you do get rid of an agent if the agent is superfluous to the explanation. That when you're studying something that's happening, there may well be an agent, and it may, if you're watching a car driving along and avoiding obstacles and turning left and turning right, you say there is an agent controlling that car, and certainly there is, there's a driver. But if you don't need an agent to explain what's going on, and we don't in the case of biology, and we don't in the case of gravity. Of course, I accept that Newton was a theist. He lived in the 17th century and everybody was. But you don't need an agent. An agent is a superfluous explanation. It's a gratuitous grafting on of something that you don't need.
Well, I find that unconvincing, because even if you accept the whole evolutionary paradigm, it depends on there being a fine-tuned universe. And that fine-tuned universe raises in itself very big questions as to the origin of the universe. Evolution doesn't deal with that.
No, it doesn't.
Nor does it deal with the origin of life.
No, those are separate points.
Those are separate points, but they're vastly major.
Natural selection doesn't just work without guidance. It requires no guidance. It's a mathematical, testable process. For example, in Richard Lenski's long-term E. coli experiment, running for over 75,000 generations, scientists observed bacteria evolve entirely new traits without any designer. It happened through random mutation and selection. No intention, no foresight, just biology. Dawkins is also right to compare this to gravity. When you drop a stone, you don't ask who's pushing it, because gravity is a law. Same with evolution. Once you understand the process, saying, God did it, adds nothing. It's like explaining lightning by saying Zeus threw a thunderbolt. It's outdated. Religious arguments like John Lennox's often rely on the God of the gaps. They insert God wherever science hasn't answered everything yet. But science progresses. Religion stays static. Christianity used to say Earth was 6,000 years old. Now we know it's 4.5 billion. Genesis says animals were created all at once. Fossils show they developed gradually over millions of years. The Bible gets biology wrong. Even the idea of a fine-tuned universe falls apart under scrutiny. If it were truly fine-tuned for life, 99.9999999% of the universe wouldn't be empty space, deadly radiation, or black holes. And if God designed humans, why would we have vestigial organs, like the appendix, or eyes with blind spots?
Your points.
They are, yes. As long as we were dealing with evolution, I was talking about evolution. If you want to move on to talk about these other things,
I'd be very happy to move on. But the notion of things in principle going from simple to complex, and they must go that way, that seems to me to be your belief, your faith.
Well, things must go from simple to complex.
Yes.
No. I mean, if things go from simple to complex, we need an explanation.
Yeah, we
Natural
do indeed.
selection is an explanation for that. It's the explanation in the case of biology.
Well, let's go back to the level of the origins of the universe and the origin of life. Now, life, as we both know, has got this digital database. It's got a language all of its own. Now, the only thing we know of capable of producing language is mind. And yet you reject that. By definition, as an atheist, you must reject that. There's no mind behind this language.
I do reject it. When you say the only thing we know that can produce language is mind, I mean, we know that what produces human language is mind. Of course we do, because that's human language. But DNA is not human language.
Yeah, but
DNA
it's very sophisticated.
It is very sophisticated, but it doesn't follow that it has to be generated by mind.
But we know of no other conceivable way of it being generated. You see, because it seems to me from the mathematical point of view, I think you said this somewhere in a different context, junk in, junk out. Here we have this phenomenally sophisticated information processor, which is the cell. Am I really to believe that that information processing capacity simply came about by the laws of nature and random processes without a mind?
Yes.
Well, absolutely. I find that impossible to believe as a mathematician.
I know you do. This is called the argument from personal incredulity.
But I could just reverse that and say your position is the argument from personal credulity.
No,
that rationality comes from irrationality, that mind comes from matter. To me, the biblical explanation in the beginning was the word, the logos. That makes perfect sense. And it makes sense of the fact that we can do science itself.
But you haven't explained where the logos came from in the first place.
Well, of course not, because the logos didn't come from anywhere.
Well then, in what sense is it an explanation?
Because the notion that you say you have to ask who created the logos, that says that you're thinking of a created God. The whole point about the God revealed in the Bible is that he was not created. He is eternal. He is the eternal logos. And I ask myself, as an inference to the best explanation, which makes more sense? That there's an eternal logos and that the universe, its laws, the capacity for mathematical description and so on, that these things are derivative, including the human mind, from the logos. That makes very much more sense to me as a scientist that it's the other way round. When there is no explanation for the existence of the universe, do you just believe the universe is a brute fact?
The universe is an easier brute fact to accept than a conscious creator.
Well, who made it?
It's you who insists on asking that question.
No, you asked me who made the creator. The universe created you, Richard. Who made it then?
A God is a complicated entity which requires a much more sophisticated and difficult explanation than a universe, which is, according to modern physics, a very simple entity. It's a very simple beginning. It's not a negligible beginning, but it's a very simple beginning. That has got to be easier to explain than something as complicated as a God.
Yeah, you can't explain the existence of God, but I think you may have missed my question. I'm drawing a parallel. You see, you say that it's, at least if don't let me put words in your mouth, of course, because that would be unfair. But I'm getting the message that it's ridiculous for me to believe in a God who created the universe and me, because I have to ask who created God. All I'm doing is turning that question round and saying, the universe, you admit, created you because there's nothing else. Well, then who created it?
I understand you perfectly. I'm making we both of us are faced with the problem of saying, how did things start?
Yes.
I'm saying it's a hell of a lot easier to start with something simple than to start with something complex. That's what complex means.
But I don't think so. If I pick up a book called The God Delusion, it's a pretty sophisticated book. It's got lots of words in it. But actually, as I look at page 1, I don't even need to go beyond page 1, I conclude that it comes from something more complex than that book itself, namely you.
Yes, I mean, obviously complex things exist and brains exist.
Well,
and
why
brains
can
are
I not
complex.
look at the universe, the whole show, which includes
Well, I'll tell
Dawkins
you
and
why.
Lennox?
I'll tell you why. Because my brain that produced a book has an explanation in its own right. That explanation is evolution. We go back and back and back to the origin of the universe. That provides an explanation for complex brains, and complex brains produce books and museums and cars and computers. Of course we have complex things that produce other complex things, but science has an explanation for where complex brains come from in terms of simple.
John Lennox argues DNA looks like language, so it must come from a mind. But that's false reasoning. DNA is a chemical sequence formed by base pairs, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, built through physical and chemical processes. We've observed how simpler molecules, like amino acids, form naturally under early Earth conditions. In 1953, the Miller-Urey experiment showed that organic molecules could form from non-living matter in a controlled lab environment. No mind needed. He also claims information can't arise without intelligence. But that's wrong. Shannon. Information theory defines information as patterns that reduce uncertainty, not something that must come from a mind. Evolution creates new information every generation through mutation and selection. For example, bacteria evolving antibiotic resistance is new, functional genetic information, and it happens with no design. As for his idea that God explains complexity, Dawkins is right. Inserting an unexplainable eternal being doesn't solve anything. It makes the problem worse. The universe can be modeled from a quantum vacuum, where virtual particles pop in and out of existence based on the uncertainty principle. This is observable physics. A God, by contrast, has never been observed, tested, or measured. Lennox quotes, "In the beginning was the Word," as if that explains the universe. But quoting John 1:1 doesn't make it true. That's theology, not evidence. There's no scientific data showing a divine logos created reality. It's an untestable claim. Christianity makes supernatural claims, virgin births, global floods, resurrection, that directly contradict what we know from geology, biology, and physics.
Beginnings.
I don't think it has at all. At the level of the origin of life, reading the literature, even the recent literature, the word miracle comes up probably far too often for your liking anyway, that they're just going from, say, the self-organizational properties of low-level molecules that you got in some kind of primeval situation to the phenomenal self-organizational potentialities of macromolecules. There's just no way you can get there.
Well, you're asserting that there's no way. We don't yet know what it is because there's a lot of work yet to be done. Science doesn't yet know everything. There are still gaps.
Yeah, but I'm not ruling out the fact that there's a physical side to it and so on. But it seems to me that the fact that the basic description of this ancient language, and it's a very ancient language of DNA, points much more arguably to the existence of a logos, a divine logos who started it, than the notion that it's going to be exhaustively explained in purely naturalistic terms. Because I would still go back to the point I made earlier, although I don't want to harp on it. This extreme reductionism removes from me the very rationality which we use to have the discussion. So that I'm not simply terribly tempted to believe it's all been designed. I believe it's all been designed, but that doesn't, and here's something else that I'd like to bring up in this, that doesn't stop science. I fear sometimes that your dichotomy, either God or science, might put some people off science because they prefer God, and that would be a pity.
Well, you're hopping around from one topic to another, but so we could do the origin of life, we could do the idea of miracles, the idea that somehow my approach to science puts people off. But, okay, let's do the last one then. When you feel like it, you will smuggle in magic. You will smuggle in magic for miracles in the Bible, you'll smuggle in magic for the origin of life. I can't explain the origin of life at the moment. I mean, nobody can, people are working on it.
But you believe that it will have a naturalistic solution?
Yes, I think that it is a cowardly cop-out to suggest that just because we don't yet understand something, therefore magic did it.
Oh, well, I would agree with that. I mean, the God of the gaps idea.
Well, but that's exactly what you're putting forward, the God of the gaps. You're saying, you're pointing to the origin of life, you're pointing to the origin of DNA and saying, oh, well, okay, Darwin's done everything after the origin of life, but he hasn't done the origin of life. No, that's the God of the gaps.
I think what I'm saying here is that there may well be two kinds of gaps. That is, there are bad gaps that science closes. But could it not be that science can open some gaps? Now, what I mean by that is this. Your assumption, as I understand it, is that there's going to be an exhaustive, reductionist, naturalistic explanation of everything in scientific terms. I don't think so. Now, if there is a God, and if he created this universe, and if, as I believe, he is personal, then I would expect certain things to follow. One, that I would see evidence, not proof, but evidence in the universe that God existed. I feel I see that in the mathematical describability of the universe, in the fine-tuning of the universe, and so on, and in the marvelous sophistication of the world. I'd expect to see God's traces there. I would also expect that there may be occasions when God speaks in special ways, and therefore the more we try to analyze those things in terms of purely reductionist science, it'll get more and more difficult instead of more and more simple. I wouldn't expect there to be many of those places. I think the origin of life might be one of them. And certainly when it comes up into more recent history, you mentioned miracles. The thing that is central for me is the fact that what you call petty, and I feel is vastly significant, because it's touching on something that affects every human being, the question of death. Now, if Jesus really literally rose from the dead as a matter of history, that makes an enormous difference to our view of the world. And so far from being petty, if this is God speaking to us, then I want to take it extremely seriously. Why do you think it's so petty?
Well, of course it makes a huge difference if it's true. But
yes, exactly.
But you've suddenly leapt from sophisticated discussions of the origin of the universe, where one can have a proper discussion about whether some sort of cosmic intelligence could have set forth the laws of physics. And you suddenly jump to a man who lived 2,000 years ago, was born of a virgin, rose again from the dead.
Well, I only did that because you mentioned it first at the beginning.
I think that's petty. By comparison with the grandeur of the universe. I mean, to put my point again, do you really think that the creator of this magnificent edifice of the universe, the expanding universe, the galaxies, he really couldn't think of a better way to get rid of the sins on this one little speck of dust than to have himself tortured? He's the one who's doing the forgiving after all. Couldn't he just have forgiven?
Because this is a moral universe, Richard, and just forgiving doesn't make sense.
I mean, he has to kill himself in order
He doesn't kill himself.
Or get himself killed, tortured.
God sends his Son into the world to provide forgiveness and to provide a basis on which he can justly bring forgiveness to me. Now,
he has to get himself killed in order to do
well,
that.
half a minute. We need to step back from this a little bit because it's actually a highly relevant topic. In your world, where is justice to be found?
Well, justice is a human construct of great importance in human affairs, and it's something that most of us have a sense of, which I think probably can be given some sort of Darwinian explanation, but I don't see where you're taking.
The RNA world hypothesis shows how self-replicating RNA molecules, precursors to DNA, could form naturally from basic chemistry. Peer-reviewed research from NASA, Harvard, and University College London shows that amino acids, nucleobases, and even sugars can form in space and survive planetary conditions. Life's building blocks don't need a miracle. They need time, pressure, and chemistry. Lennox brings up the language of DNA, but this is metaphor. DNA is not a human language. It's a biochemical sequence. Just like gravity or thermodynamics, it follows natural rules. Saying only a mind can write DNA is no different than saying only a mind can make snowflakes. It's false. His leap to Jesus' resurrection is even weaker. There is no physical evidence Jesus rose from the dead. The Gospels were written 40 to 70 years after his death, contradict each other, and reflect theological agendas, not historical records. The earliest Gospel, Mark, ends with no resurrection appearance at all in its oldest manuscripts. That's not reliable documentation. It's ancient mythology. Christianity says sin must be paid for with blood. But that's Bronze Age justice, not universal truth. Societies today have abandoned blood sacrifice because it's immoral and unnecessary. If God is all-powerful, he doesn't need to satisfy justice with violence. He could just forgive, like modern humans do. So here's the real question. If we've explained thunder, disease, and the stars without God, why cling to him for the origin of life or morality? Let us know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe evidence matters more than ancient stories.